we want 15 grand, otherwise we're going to kill him. He just lost it and threatened the kidnappers. Right, we're going to kill him now, and hung up. We didn't hear anything for 6 months. It's the most unregulated, ungoverned, dangerous trade in the world, yet it has a 93% chance of success. Without trust, it doesn't work. Here I am, running all over the place, saving all these lives, but I couldn't save the one life that really mattered. I always wanted to become a detective, and so I joined Special Branch, a ringside seat into the human psychology. What makes people tick? What makes them do what they do? There's more people being to the International Space Station than do this job full time. So there could be anywhere between 30 and 40,000 kidnappings a year. Life is a negotiation. We're seeking cooperation and collaboration and maybe a bit of influence all day long, every day.
It's debrief time, and this week on the debrief, I've got a former Met policeman, hostage negotiator, best-selling author, you name it, he's done it. Right, we're going to have a chat about it right now. It's Scott Walker. How are you, Scott? You all right, mate?
Yeah, good to see you.
Good to have you on the show. Listen, what we're going to do is I'm going to take you right back, as I've done with all my guests, to your childhood, and then we'll just build up a picture. I'm going to profile you today.
Sounds good. Let's do it.
I think I know a little bit about the hostage stuff, but I'm going to do my best here. I'm sure you'll be able to turn it on me at some stage.
Sure.
Right. So, listen, childhood. How was it?
Childhood, it was interesting. Looking back, I learnt so much growing up, which helped me to do the job I ended up doing.
Stable background?
Well, I'll explain. It depends what you really mean by stable in a way.
Yeah.
Grew up in Birmingham, grandparents, your classic working class people, bought their own council home, lots of hard work,
Yeah.
multiple jobs, and had a really relatively decent childhood.
Yeah.
A number of divorces with my parents, went through several times. Quite a highly emotive.
Who did you stay with? Did you stay with your mum or your
I stayed
dad?
with my mum.
Okay.
She ended up marrying 3-4 times in the end.
Wow, all while you was a nipper?
Yeah.
Wow, okay, so it's sort of like come and go. Did you
Yeah,
time
well,
them, did you?
up until about up until my late teens, really. And it was quite a highly emotive family environment. What I mean by that was there was high highs and low lows.
Yeah.
And so it started to build in me an ability to be a practical psychologist in a way.
Yeah.
To really understand, okay, well, what makes people tick? What makes them do what they do? And then how to deal with that and actually get along with people. And and then eventually I left home and I started working in the legal profession in Birmingham.
Okay. Did you do well at school then? Did you get grades? And all
I
that
was
sort of
probably
stuff?
classed as gobby.
Yeah.
And quite confident. And GCSE level did okay, but at A levels, that just comes at the wrong time in your life. I mean, I was interested in drinking and girls.
So much else going
Drinking
on.
and girls. And the last thing I wanted to do was to be studying ancient history or stuff.
Yeah.
And I kind of crashed and bombed in those A-level years.
So you've bailed out and you've gone to work in the legal game.
Yeah, well, there was at the time I was about 17. I actually wanted to kind of drop out and be a bit of a traveller. So I grew my hair long, had dreadlocks, just wanted to be a bit of a bum.
All love and peace. And
Yeah, all of that rubbish. And then my parents were like, no, if you want to have that lifestyle, you got to pay for it.
Yeah.
And then there was an advert in the paper to work in a barrister's chambers. And this was days before mobile phones and the internet, really.
Yeah.
And I managed to get a job interview. And so I shaved off the dreadlocks, brought a suit from Next,
Yeah.
and rocked up. And I was knocking on the door to be let into the chambers. And there's no answer. And then I kept knocking on the door thinking, where is everybody? I've got the right location. And then a window opened above and went, what are you here for? And I said, well, for the interview. You got the wrong date. It's next week. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not a great start. So then I went back the following week, got the job in his barrister's chambers in Birmingham, and I was there from the age of 18 through to 24, where I went off and joined the police.
Okay. Did you learn much about law at the barristers, or was it more of like a runner type role?
It was like a runner, broker, wheeler dealer, arranging the fees and the cases for the barristers. But he gave me again another insight into different personality types.
Yeah.
As well as the legal profession, reading all the case papers. You know, it was a work hard, play hard environment.
Yeah, long hours,
long hours, quite a big drinking culture back in the day. This was like the early 90s. But the friends I made in those few years are still my best friends today.
Okay.
It's funny, it must be in the military, those people in those early years where you built
the
a
lads
formative...
who did basic training, you know, you all went through the same thing. Nobody had any money, all that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You forged
Shared experiences.
Great friends. Yeah, great friendships.
And those 6 years I spent there were just some of the best years, really.
Yeah. So you decided to become a cop. What pushed you over to that side?
Well, I was reading all the case papers every day, all these interesting cases and crimes that have been committed. And I thought, I've done this for 6 years now, being a barrister's clerk. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to give it a go. So jacked it all in, applied to the Met in London, and I must have been about 24. I was engaged at the time, actually. So that didn't go down too well. That wasn't going to work out, and moved down to London, where I didn't know anybody really apart from my dad who lived down there. And that was probably one of the best decisions I made, actually, because you just opened up a whole new world.
Was it quite difficult to get into the police? I mean, I joined the army. I never even thought of the police. In fact, I probably couldn't have done because I had a junior criminal record. So it was out of bounds for me. So what was the procedure like? Was it easy enough to do?
Yeah. I mean, getting into the barrister's chambers, there was just an interview. Yeah. And then in the police, it was application form, interview, and then there's...
medicals to be had.
There's a medical, which, looking back now, is the old coffin drop kind of thing.
Coffin tickle.
I mean, imagine that these days. You just you just would have
put those in there. It's like,
so anyway, so I did that, and then there was an 18-week residential training at Hendon of the police training.
What was that like?
Again, it was an interesting 18 weeks.
Is it a screamy, shouty type environment, or is it sort of like very much more of like I'd call an adult environment?
It's kind of halfway between the two. There's an element of, particularly in some of the self-defense training and some of the discipline around a bit of the marching we still had to do and all that kind of looking after your stuff. And the pressure was on. Each week you had exams, and if you didn't pass, you got another go. And if you still didn't pass, you were backclassed. And then if you failed it then, you were kicked out.
You're out. So
the pressure, academically, you're doing a law degree effectively in 18 weeks and all the practical aspects of what it means to be a cop on the streets of London. But again, built some great friendships there. Yeah. Which they've stopped it now. It's no longer residential. It's a bit like modular base. You do some online. You go in for 1 day a week.
So you're becoming a copper on Zoom.
Well, I mean, not quite, but almost. And I think it's taken away some of the robustness needed. I.e., you've got to go away from home for 18 weeks, and you've got to you've got total immersion in what it means to think, feel, and act as a copper in the modern world.
Yeah, which is difficult because a lot of being a policeman is based on experience, isn't it? And how to deal and interact with people who are actually there and not, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And you put together, there's people from all walks of life, all ages, colours, creeds, religions and on, in this environment where, you know what, if you want to survive the 18 weeks and actually enjoy it and come out being an all-rounded, switched-on young probationer, you've got to learn how to get on with people because that's the number one role, I guess, of a cop is you've got to be able to understand and relate to people. And
you've got to be empathetic as well. And you've got to be able to say, right, and understand other people's points of view, even if sometimes you disagree with it.
100%.
You've still got to understand it, haven't you? Do you know what I mean? So you finished your training. Where did you go? What was your first sort of like posting or beat or whatever it was called?
My naivety is like a lot of people that come to the big smoke for the first time. I want to go central London. I want to do the West End. Yeah. And I'm so glad I never got that. because I would have just been a tourist guide for tourists. That way to Buckingham Palace or whatever. But I got posted to Lewisham,
Okay.
southeast London,
Yeah.
which was a great foundation.
Remember your first collar?
I do actually. And when you think about it, Lewisham Ground covered Deptford at the north,
Yeah.
all the way through Lewisham, Catford, Downham and Bellingham. And so for people who know that part of London, you've got a whole mix,
Yeah.
Some not, quite affluent areas up towards Blackheath, but for the rest of it, it can be quite challenging. It certainly was back in the late 90s, quite a challenging environment. Lots of crime, very busy. And as a brand new probation and a squeaky uniform coming out of Hendon, my first collar, like lots of us, was a shoplifter who I thought, oh, he's just nicked a bit of meat from Lidl or Aldi in Catford or wherever it was. And I took him to the old Lewisham police station. I'm stood there about to give the evidence to the custody sergeant as to why I've arrested this person. And the prisoner turns around and went, "This is your first time, isn't it?" And I went, no, it's not. I've arrested many people. How dare you? My ego just kind of going out of control. And I went, "What makes you say that?" He goes, "You still stood here with your helmet on your head, holding my arm. I'm in handcuffs. I'm not going anywhere." And you could just tell I was like, "Oh, okay, right, okay." And then the tutor constable who was looking after me just went, "You may want to request a strip search of this guy." And I went, "Really? Why? What's he done? What are you seeing that I'm not seeing?" And he goes, "Trust me, he's obviously using lots of drugs and he's got about 5 layers of clothing on. It's really, really warm. And we've nicked him for having all this stuff he's going to sell for drugs." And then, so I made the request, really, really nervous. And then we did the strip search, and lo and behold, there was drugs secreted, and the sun don't shine.
Lot came out,
and
like shaking a tree.
And I was like, okay, so yeah, this is what it is to be a young probation on the streets of London.
So, apart from shoplifters, what other sort of like collars did you get? Do any collars stick out in your mind as being sort of like, wow, that was a good one, or that
There's
was
some
a
good stops,
scary
yeah.
one? Or...
It's the cliche where it's the basic traffic stop. You see somebody doing a red light or not wearing a seatbelt, or the car's looking a bit dodgy, and you pull them over. You go to ask a few questions just to kind of identify, is this person allowed to drive this car? And then that kind of sixth sense kicks in.
Yeah, there's something not right with this geezer.
And you go, something's not stacking up. And in the end, you've got your grounds for a search of the car, and then you'll find 1,000 ecstasy tablets.
Yeah.
Or you'll find a machete down in the footwell. Or they'll be wanted for murder up in the north of England or somewhere. All from just random stops that somebody didn't quite look.
So would you say then, in policing, intuition and your feelings come into play when actually sort of like dealing with people? You could look at someone and go, "Tell you what, they ain't right."
Yeah.
Do you have to base that on evidence, or can you base that just on a sort of like, "I'll tell you what, you are dodgy, son"? You know what I mean?
It starts out with intuition.
Okay.
Which is built from experience.
Yeah.
But then you've got to be really mindful of confirmation bias and stereotyping. Yeah. However,
yes, I'll get that.
It's a great starter for 10.
Yeah.
Because if you go, okay, why is that person in this area at this time doing what they're doing?
Yeah.
Is that normal and natural? Is their behaviour as a normal person would behave?
Yeah, so I mean, as a soldier, I was always taught to look for the abnormal in place of the normal. Do you know what I mean? So there'll be something slightly a bit, wow, that shouldn't be there. Window open in Northern Ireland, might be a bomb around the corner waiting because they've opened them so they don't want the windows. That sort of thing. And so that sort of comes into play with the police as well.
It's exactly the same because the window open by itself isn't a drama.
No.
But in the context of what else is going on at that time of day, in that environment...
it's freezing cold, there's nobody there, but there should be people there.
Exactly. And so it just means you've got to have this super power of curiosity of going, right, I want to find out more. And as long as you're doing so professionally, politely, you're not being an arse about it, actually, most people don't object to it. But then when people would really kick off over the minor of issues, you think you're just trying to distract or deflect something.
Yeah,
and
there's something bigger. So you're almost handing you something to get your teeth into.
Yeah, and
by being obstructive.
And some cops would just turn a blind eye, particularly in the early careers, and be a bit nervous about dealing with that. But I always said to cops when I got a bit more experience and I was taking junior ones through, don't be frightened of the confrontation. As long as you do it in a professional way, the law-abiding citizens, your average member of the public, they want us to do our job, to stop the bad people.
If you've got nothing to hide, there shouldn't be a problem, should there?
Exactly.
So, how long did you do the normal beat type stuff, the run-of-the-mill?
Yeah, I did 2 years. I did my probation in Lewisham. Loved it. And again, still keep in contact. We'd go for beers and curries with the guys on that early team. And then I always wanted to go become a detective and investigate serious organised crime, but particularly counter-terrorism. And so I joined Special Branch straight after my probation. This was just after 9/11. My probation finished in the November after that September, and Special Branch advertised for
They must have been screaming out of people at that time.
They were. I think I remember, because you had to sit an exam, and the Special Branch exam was this kind of fabled, mythical test that you kind of got or you didn't get, really, in terms of understanding it. And it's just some random questions, a lot of politics and history as well as modern culture. And you had to write an essay, and a bit like, I guess, a civil service fast stream type approach. And I was like, oh, dear me, I'll give it a go. And for some reason I passed, and then got the interview. And then I rocked up at Scotland Yard on the Monday, and got taken to one side by the DS, the detective sergeant, and went, okay, we do things slightly different here than you might have found in your experience at Lewisham or wherever you've come from. What do you like to focus on? What aspect of terrorism would you like to work on? I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, well, you can choose the Middle East, you could choose the Indian subcontinent, you could choose the Turks and Kurds, whatever it is for you. And because there's an expectation that you became a subject matter expert on a number of terrorist groups and the impact they have on London. And so then he was then understood about, okay, well, it's about building relationships and networks within that community and the surrounding groups. So if there's any kind of incident in London, you could then go and brief the assistant commissioner or partner agencies on what this means for London.
So would you get into those communities, would you? Say, for instance, you took any one of those communities you mentioned. Could you get into those communities?
There were people who were willing to speak to police as a community representative, say. But it'll also be no surprise to people to know that there were people who wanted to speak to police but didn't want anyone else to know about that.
I can imagine, because, back in your communities, talking to the police from, even some council estates, if you get seen talking to a cop, you're gonna get a name for yourself straight away, aren't you? Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. So, but the incentive for people to talk to police or the security services was, we don't like what these other people are doing in our name.
Yeah.
Or they're gonna bring undue pressure and scrutiny and hassle on us for stuff that we don't believe in. They're bringing a bad reputation on our particular group.
With the more extreme stuff, I think the average person within any group looks at the extreme stuff and goes, "What are you doing?"
Exactly.
You know what I mean? It's just insane, isn't it?
So again, that was a complete shift in how to think and operate. Whereas before, I'd be getting my warrant card out multiple times a day, stopping, searching people, nicking people, doing all sorts. Whereas when I joined Special Branch, I don't think I got my warrant card out apart from getting on the train
to get in the camp or whatever.
to get in the building and stuff. So it was a lot more cerebral and also satisfying. So I did the desk work for about 18 months. Then I went off to do a bit of time at port. So Special Branch officers at the time were stationed at Heathrow and London City and Waterloo for the Eurostar. And then I went on to the surveillance team.
Yeah.
So there was an armed covert surveillance capability targeting terrorists
So that now you're getting into the more interesting type of stuff. I'm going to be honest with you. If someone said to me, stick at a desk for 18 months, I'd walk. Do you know what I mean? I couldn't do that. So fair play to you for doing that, because I'd say no straight away. Like, do you know what I mean?
But it was, yeah, I was interested because the subject matter was interesting, and again, worked with some great people. And you would have seen this in your military career. You know, when you've got good people alongside you, it makes the job so much more enjoyable.
Yeah.
But when the opportunity came to join the surveillance team, I remember rocking up on day one, and I went, right, Scott, have you, what's your driving classification like? I said, well, I'm a response driver. I can drive on blues and twos and whatever. Yeah, but have you done your advanced course and have you done your anti-hijack stuff? I went, no. Okay, well, tomorrow morning you're going to go and report up at Hendon for the next 4 to 6 weeks. But back in my previous posting at Lewisham, that was like rocking horse shit. You had to go through multiple hoops to jump through to get that course, and it was like, okay, Scott, when you come back from that, you need to go on your firearms courses, and then we'll do like the camera courses, then we'll do all the other stuff. And then the next couple of years on the surveillance team was just, it was like a step up. You know, as you can imagine, the nature of that role, worked alongside, the military. We would train extensively, and we would be up against professionally some of the, the most switched on, challenging terrorists and criminals that you could come across, really.
So the surveillance stuff itself, armed on the streets in the UK. I mean, that's exciting stuff, that, isn't it? Yeah.
And, well, I mean, you know this as well, when you carry weapons, particularly through the covert carriage, you kind of have to be switched on, particularly when you're walking around the streets of a UK city that, and there's been stuff in the news like years ago.
You can't afford to be sane. You can't afford a compromise, can you?
When people would leave their guns in Sainsbury's toilets or all this kind of rubbish. So you kind of have to stay switched on in that sense. And it just meant professionally, it was, as I said, it was another level of having to be focused, switched on top of my game.
Is there any jobs you can talk about openly now? Is there anything you can sort of like say the sort of stuff you were doing or who you were up against, or not particularly who, but what you were actually doing?
I can talk about the stuff, or I can allude to the stuff that's gone to trial.
Okay.
That's been in the public domain around some of the airlines plot, the liquids. That's the reason why you can't take the liquids on the plane over a certain amount, and the ricin plot. And
let's have a chat about the aircraft stuff then.
Yeah, so there's a group of in East London. There's a group of Islamic terrorists who were looking to bring down
a large commercial,
aircraft, and they wanted to do that by bringing liquid bombs onto the plane.
How did that come about, that intelligence?
Well, where it originates from, I don't know. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't talk about it.
I'm going to push you, you know that.
Yeah. There's been a number of documentaries about this anyway, but essentially the intel was coming in. We, along with many, many other organisations and agencies, both in UK and abroad, were looking at seeing where this plot went and ultimately preventing them from doing that. So my job would be to follow these terrorists around the streets of London, buying up the liquid, buying up the means to do that. And in the end, a hand was forced. The Americans kind of forced a hand to a certain degree, and then it was quite a well-known, well-publicised arrest operation where we went from being covert and following them to going to an arrest phase to bring it forward.
What's the sort of like reaction time? Because obviously you could almost compromise yourself by the fact that if they're plotting to do something with liquids, and all of a sudden liquids are now being searched for in the airport, you've almost compromised that operation straight away, haven't you? So what's the flash to bang time before you going, right, you need to start stopping people getting on the plane carrying large bottles of water?
Yeah, well, this is obviously under constant review by people way above my pay grade as to how long do we let this run for
before we do something about it.
And back in the days with the IRA...
Because you want to make the arrest as well, don't you?
Exactly.
So you don't want to compromise it to the point, but then you don't want nothing dropping out the sky, do you?
And so back in the IRA days where they would let jobs run, generally speaking, a lot longer because they wanted to build up enough evidence to get the case to stand up at court and then send people to prison for a long time. Whereas in the early 2000s, with a shift in focus, a lot of the plots weren't allowed to go as long because just the threat to the wider population was increased. And a lot of people, the the suicide bombers, they didn't care if they lived or died. Well, at least the IRA, they wanted to survive.
Yeah. They want to go home. Yeah.
And so, yeah, that was a shift change there.
How difficult was it to operate in some of these communities? I mean, I know myself. I lived in Hackney for ages. If I wanted to cut around, say, anywhere near the East London Mosque and try and blend, I don't blend in, do I?
No.
I blend in all wrong. I'd have to completely change my appearance. Did you have to change your appearance and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, to a certain degree, it was about, you had to have the confidence, and wherever you walked, or everywhere you went, you had to have a reason for being there.
Yeah. And you've got to look like you belong there as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as long as you're not drawing attention to yourself, but at literally every step when you're deployed, it's, if I get stopped and challenged now, why am I here and what am I doing? Just as you would do if you were there genuinely, you'd have a reason for what you were doing.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't so much about wearing fake glasses and moustaches and peering over the copy of the Times on the big nose and hats and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, you might change your clothes if you'd been on foot behind a target for a while.
Yeah.
And then you just rotate to the back of the team and what have you. But yeah, I think it's how you give off, the energy you give off as to, I could walk into any shop or building within reason and go, okay, I've got a reason for being here, and nobody would bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
But I think it's if then, as we said at the beginning, if your behaviour then becomes abnormal in what is normal,
people will see it straight away.
And people go, hang on, you've walked around that block 3 times now, and you've not gone in anywhere.
And some of these estates, people are proper conscious, aren't they? They everything gets seen, doesn't it? And some people are on the look for it. I mean, if you go to some of the estates in Hackney, the young lads are scouting so they can flog their drugs and what have you.
Absolutely.
They're looking for people coming in and out, aren't they? They're physically actually looking for you.
Yeah, so it's having your wits about you, which is why unarmed combat training was pretty extensive compared to the normal cops. And again, just because you've got a gun doesn't mean that you want to use it or you can use it in those kind of circumstances, because if you're going to get your gun out, then you need a kind of, what's the next stage? You're going to then put it back, or you're going to use it? And whereas actually it could almost become a hindrance in some of these scenarios of being armed. If that makes sense? So,
yeah, no, it does totally make sense. Yeah. It's the escalation that you bring to the party with that gun sometimes goes way up over and above what is actually required to calm it down. But the gun makes it worse, doesn't it? Because you've taken it to there straight away.
Yeah, absolutely. And so occasionally I'll be like, oh, God, I wish I wasn't armed. As counterintuitive as that sounds.
Perhaps I could have a roll around with this person.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't matter if it falls, you know what I mean? But if it falls out now and I am armed.
Yeah, so
you did that for a number of years?
Yeah, so on the surveillance team, and then I just wanted to change. So I went into running informants. Yeah. So I joined a small team supporting the homicide teams and organised crime teams around weapon importation, human trafficking, drugs, about recruiting and running informants to give information on.
How does the informants work? I mean, are they hard to recruit? Where can you go into how you get hold of these people?
Yeah, again, this as I said to you at the very beginning, from the childhood onwards, looking back, the steps on my career are really clearly plotted out. But at the time, I'm like, I'm just having so much fun here.
Yeah.
Doing what I'm doing. I actually get paid to do this,
Yeah.
And so people will become an informant or an agent or snout, whatever you want to call them, for a number of reasons. Usually it's for money. Sometimes it's for ideology. Sometimes it's to get a bit of revenge on somebody. Sometimes it's for a bit of significance and to fuel their ego. So there's a number of reasons. And there's quite a tightly strict process in place to make sure that you don't give too much away from your side. Because if I was in an organised criminal gang, do you know what? Okay, then, Phil, why don't you pretend to be an informant and go to the police to offer some information and find out what they really know?
Right, okay, so, So, I don't know, take a football hooligan or something like that, do you know what I mean? He might want to do it. Would it lessen his sentence if he was in trouble, perhaps?
Yeah, if an informant gives information of material benefit to the prosecution, you can then write a letter to the judge. It doesn't mean that they're going to get acquitted or they're not going to stand trial or they're not going to be sentenced.
Yeah, because that would give them away anyway. So then they're going to get their own community justice, aren't they?
So there's that. And so the judge can alter the sentencing, for example, based on that.
It's a very finely balanced world, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? In the world of the snout, it is it's a proper gamble, isn't it?
It's fraught with challenges every single
sides,
day on both, because there's been not so much, but there has been corruption over the years.
Yeah.
Where it's like, well, who's running who?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So yeah, it could get to that. Oh, it's a honking world, isn't it?
It's a honking world that now has been completely overhauled and professionalized, and there's vetting, and the training is has been improved massively. But it does bring really significant benefits if you've got a really good, well-placed source, and you can back it up by other evidence as a result of that. That's worth its weight in gold. This human intelligence.
Would there ever be a point where a really decent source, if you knew something about him, that would be overlooked? So you say a source commits a honking crime. Do you know what I mean? Say, I don't know, you're dealing with a drug dealer, and you know this drug dealer has given someone a good old hiding for something, all right? So he's given him a good old beating, a good old GBH, all right?
Mm.
Would you overlook that if he was bringing in some really decent gear for you? So if he was bringing in arrests that were leading to the top guys, would you overlook that crime, or would you sort of like overlook it to the point where you could get this guy in and then go back and arrest him for it?
You wouldn't overlook it because, again,
that's not in the public interest.
It's not in the public interest. It's if you stop somebody in the street and go, "What do you think about this?" And I know common sense isn't that common, but I think there's a reasonable expectation of most people. If you stop and spoke to them in the street about what do you think about this, most people would give a similar kind of answer. And being an informant didn't give carte blanche, get out of jail card for the informant. And we would say to them at the beginning, this does not give you a green light to commit crime unless that is specifically authorised, which you can do. But that's not going to be to beat somebody up or to do anything like that.
You can drive down the wrong way street or something simple.
Yeah, he'd be like, "You idiot! What are you doing?"
Yeah,
and then you'd have to deal with it accordingly, and then decisions will get made as to the best course of action for that.
So managing a source must be an absolute. Is it a team job? Could you have a whole team managing a source nowadays to make sure that one? Because if you go one-on-one, there's the outside chance that you could get flipped.
There's a lot of small teams, and then you've got a controller who tightly oversees it. But you're given a lot of leeway because you've got to build trust. You've got to build that relationship and rapport with somebody who you've really got nothing in common with. But you need to be in a position where you can cooperate and collaborate in terms of then coming up with information. And yes, that takes time, and it takes a skill set that gets developed with experience. But it is fraught with challenges.
So you did that for a number of years. What did you move on to? I want to get up to the point where you become a hostage negotiator. And how you got into that.
And also, around this time, I spent a bit of time with the military, went out to Iraq as part of a small interrogation team.
Oh, okay. Oh, cool.
As part of Operation Telic back in 2004, 2005, with the Inc Corps, and that was to again the human intelligence side of things, about overseeing some of the agents and sources that are out there, as well as some of the captured insurgents, about questioning them.
Enjoy that?
Yeah, it was an interesting experience. Again, I had a pretty good tour out there. I'm sure everyone's experience is different.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I enjoyed it professionally. It was rewarding, some good people again. And came back thinking that was a good 9-10 months of my time, and then literally came back into the police and continued my day job, so to speak.
Yeah. Did you get a gong? Did you get your medal for that?
Yeah, I got that, yeah.
Yeah, good. Those they looked after you.
Yeah. But interesting, one of the guys I met out there was also involved in the source world back in the UK, back in London. So it was a bit of a busman's holiday to a certain degree.
Yeah.
So I came back, and then I went for promotion, which back then meant going back into uniform. Oof. Back to Lewisham, actually.
That must be a kick in the teeth. I mean, that would be the equivalent of me going sort of like from SF back to a rifle company and an infantry battalion, going, "Oh my God!" You know what I mean?
You're in your troop, and you're going, "I'm just living my best life," and it's like, well, actually, no, you're back to
Yeah, you got to go and do that again, which is a...
But there's no way around it. So I could fight it, or I could just embrace it and go, do you know what? I'm going to enjoy this. So I went back for, again, about a year, 18 months. And then I went back, then I transferred back.
When you went back to uniform, did you see things in a different light now?
Yeah.
And did it make you a different policeman?
Yeah. Far more, we don't need to worry about this. You're worrying about the wrong things here.
So you weren't gripping onto the geezer, the shoplifter anymore?
No, mate, I'll be sitting down with the shoplifter going, all right, mate, let's have a little chat.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, you're going to get you nicked. You're going to get charged probably, but let's have a chat.
How can we do this in a good way? How can we benefit out of this?
Completely. I'd grown up 1,000%.
Yeah, cool.
And then with the young PCs who were coming through then, as I was the sergeant, it was like, hey, come on, there's a bigger world out there. It doesn't end on the borders of Lewisham.
Yeah.
And let's approach this in a different way.
So you could pass some of that down now, couldn't you,
Exactly.
presumably, which is a great thing.
So I did that. Then I went over to Greenwich as a detective sergeant, and then temporarily as a DI, running what was called the community safety unit. And I was like, which is basically all like domestic abuse and that kind of stuff. And it was the last place on earth I wanted to go. I'd spent at that point over 10 years as this young, thrusting counter-terror cop going all over the world, doing my thing. And that was the last place I wanted to go. But it was one of the best experiences.
Really?
Because we set up this proactive team where it would go around dealing with the perpetrators and the victims of domestic abuse and working with them. And we had an exponential positive impact on reducing offending, supporting the victims, particularly in some of the potential domestic homicides and attempted murders, where you'd see the benefit of the support you're offering firsthand in people's front rooms. Does that make sense? I'm sitting down with the families.
Yeah, so you're actually making a difference.
It was a tangible difference. When I was on the surveillance team, they all merge into one, those operations.
Yeah,
and you
fire up the chain of command. You're only a small part of the jigsaw, but now you're seeing the whole picture, and you're doing something about the whole picture.
Exactly. These are individuals that you can relate to, and you know that you're having a tangible benefit to improve their lives. And
did it ever sort of like pull at you at a personal level, though? You know what I mean? Because you're obviously seeing women and children that have been battered, or even in some cases blokes that have been battered by the woman. Either way round, and you're thinking, I feel sorry for you, son. You know what I mean? Or whatever. Do you know what I mean? So do you ever get a personal sort of like feeling and have to deal with that?
Yeah, it was. I always summed it up as I gave a voice to people without one.
Okay.
So the victims, their families, people who were on the receiving end of some of this stuff around, I've got you. I've got your back here, and we're going to do absolutely everything that we can so you don't have to go through this again.
And what sort of things can you do to help people out? I mean, I know there's various refuges, isn't it, that you can put people in?
There is, but it was taking a really kind of robust approach to the domestic abuse kind of scene, to be honest.
Yeah.
As in positive arrest policy, but really offering consistent, detailed, ongoing support through third-party charities and stuff, and making sure if injunctions need to be put in place, we'd support that. We weren't coming from a place of judgment. We weren't judging anybody. We were saying we're here to reduce this, because every time we did that, it avoided a homicide taking place. Because a lot of the homicides, a lot of the murders that took place were, obviously you had all the gang stuff, but outside of that, it will be in a domestic setting.
Really? It's amazing that, because you don't tend to sort of like, I wouldn't have thought that was the case. Do you know what I mean?
So, we looked at it, we reframed it as, okay, we're preventing murders from happening from kids growing up in those environments, because then it just spirals on and we don't interrupt the pattern. So, again, that was, just a really, again, I use this word interesting a lot, but this was interesting and it was satisfying. And I did that. And it was at Greenwich where I bump into a guy in the canteen one day, just got chatting, we'd kind of known each other for a while. And I said, mate, you look knackered, but, what have you been up to? He goes, well, I've just been helping to resolve this kidnapping, being in something called a red center, which is where all the communications between the families and the kidnappers take place. And I was like, that sounds much better than... At that point, I'd been promoted again, and so my job was admin and management.
Yeah, you're out the living room. You're now.
I'm out the living room, or nicking people, and I'm just processing crime or supervising crime reports. And I went, mate, tell me more. And he goes, okay, well, there's this provision in the Met that we have where we respond to kidnap for ransom cases. And there's a team, the Hostage Crisis and Negotiation Unit, which, as well as doing all the kind of prevent suicides and hostage taking, they also used to run the rota, the team, the cadre of people who responded to kidnaps. And so he introduced me. I went for a couple of interviews and the process, and got selected, and then got given a phone and a recording device, and this was in addition to your day job, and then waiting for the phone to ring. And the phone never rang at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning when it's convenient. You sat there with your tea and your paper, you wait. Yeah. It'd be 3 a.m. on a Sunday. Or
is it quite a common thing?
Well, we, at the time, so this would be 2013, 2012, something like that, maybe 2012, whatever. There's about one a week in London.
Really? Wow.
And
that's a lot more than I'd have thought.
That would be what we used to call bad on bad. So it would be criminals kidnapping other criminals because of some drug debt gone wrong or lack of respect. So that would be the vast majority of those kind of kidnappings.
So a criminal gang would come to the police to say that some other criminal gang had taken one of their mates. Is that sort of like the sketch that we've got here? Or would it be the family that weren't criminals that would come to the police and go, my old man's a criminal and he's been taken by this criminal gang?
It usually you get a family member going, my son, my brother has been taken by this gang, but my son, my brother, he's completely innocent. He's not involved in this.
So they wouldn't, yeah,
but actually that son or the brother,
you would know.
He's on the periphery or involved or knows something, which is why they've been targeted in the first place.
So then presumably the criminal gang that's taken this, whether he's a criminal or not, is now saying to, who are they asking the money from? Are they saying to the family?
The gang are saying,
back?
He's ripped us off. Often the amounts be really low, like $5,000 or so. We want $5,000 or $15,000. Otherwise, we're going to kill him.
Okay.
And so the family would come to police. We'd kind of press the button, and lots of things would happen. One of which would be I'd get a phone call along with another colleague of mine, and then we would race as quickly as possible to what became the Red Centre.
Okay.
And the Red Centre would be the family member is receiving phone calls from the kidnappers, and we would set up a little cell where we would sit down with the family and brief them on what to say and how to say.
Okay, so you weren't coming into the coalface and talking to these people.
So we'd come in and sit alongside the family. Yeah. So say relatively yours being kidnapped. Yeah. I'd be like, right, Phil, once we've got an understanding of what's happened, this is what we want to be saying. This is how we want to be saying it and when. These are our objectives and our outcomes.
Okay.
And then we'd practice it. We'd rehearse some of these calls.
Yeah.
And then when the calls would come in, we'd obviously record them. We'd say what we needed to say.
What was the policy? Say for instance, I'm going, right, I need $5,000. Would you say, right, can you get $5,000? Can you pay them the $5,000? Would there be a negotiation to be had, or would it be the sort of like terrorism thing where the government always say no negotiation, no?
Yes and yes and yes. And I'll explain this. This is a whole, like the Marvel multiverse. It's a bit like that with Kidnap for Ransom. And so in these cases, we'd say to the family, okay, how much money have you got? What are you willing and able to pay? And in the background, so I could be in a flat somewhere or a family home, around a kitchen table, be me, my colleague, and maybe one or two members of the family. and we could be there for days or weeks, but usually it wouldn't go on for more than a week or two. Or we go to a hotel room or whatever. And in the background, there'd be various things that the police would be doing to try and locate where the hostages were.
So if you could kick a door in to get this resolved, that's an option.
They would, and by and large, that's what used to happen in London or in the UK, as you would do in America, for example. And sometimes we would pretend to put the money on the road. The kidnappers would go and collect the money, and that's when the arrest would happen. And so that was a pretty straightforward-ish type negotiation. And so I did that for a number of years. And then in 2015, so I was busy doing that, and I came home one day, been dealing with some Albanian drug gang, managed to get the brother back. It always seems to be the brother or the cousin. And I remember walking home and walking through the door, and it was really, really quiet. I'm thinking, where's everybody? Where are my kids? And I remember they were away in Spain. And then I had a shower, lay down on the bed because I was knackered. I hadn't slept for about 4 or 5 days at this point. And then my phone rings. And I answer it. And I recognise the voice. And it was my stepdad. And he just says, she's gone and done it. She's only gone and done it. And then in that moment, I realised that my mum had killed herself on the 3rd attempt.
Oof.
And so I'm sat there on the end of the bed thinking, here I am running all over the place, saving all these lives, but I couldn't save the one life that really mattered.
Wow.
And so that was a real eye-opener for me. And that was a bit of a plot twist. And at a moment where I thought, right, you've got all this skill set, you've got all this knowledge, you can emotionally self-regulate, but this is tough.
Must have hurt, yeah.
But also realize, hey, no one's going to come along and go, hi, Scott, it's all going to be okay with the cavalry. I knew this is what I talk about in the book, it's down to the individual to take ownership for how they get themselves out of these dark places.
Yeah.
You've got to take ownership and responsibility for doing it. And so I realized in that moment there needed to be a change. And so within 4 or 5 months, that had happened. I'd got divorced and I'd left the police.
Wow, so your life completely...
In less than 6 months.
Yeah.
Complete change of direction to a certain degree. And so when I left the police, I actually went to then join a small consultancy in London that specialised in, let's call it crisis response. So this would be kidnap for ransom.
Because there was still a lot of that sort of stuff going on all over the world, but there's all the shipping stuff in Somalia. I mean, you name it, it's happening somewhere, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So I've worked for companies myself. I've sat in on these things. So I've seen it firsthand.
So piracy, extortion, malicious product tampering, the glass in baby food type stuff.
Yeah.
But the main bulk of the work was kidnap for ransom and extortion. So I left the police on the Thursday, and on the Monday I joined this firm. There's only a couple of firms in the world that do this.
Yeah.
And on day one, I'm not sure if they're just blowing smoke up our arse, but there was, there's more people being to the International Space Station than do this job full time, tier one. I was like, okay, I'll have some of this. And week one, there were three kidnaps that come in. One involved in a terrorist group out in the Far East, in the Philippines. One in Nigeria, and one somewhere in the Middle East. I can't remember now. And so that was my baptism of fire, where I was a new boy again. I'd gone from being pretty experienced to another new boy, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 1 mouth, use them in that order, and just like a sponge, just watching how the more experienced negotiators and consultants dealt with it. And then that was 2015, and I didn't stop then. Literally, there were just hundreds of cases all over the world, just bouncing around.
Why are some of these cases not being... how come these cases are falling to a private company? Is it because you've got time to dedicate to it? Why are they sort of like the authorities in these other countries like Nigeria and that, are they endorsing what you're doing, or are they sort of like, oh, well, they'll do this one because we can't do that one? Is that
well, from your experience in the Somali piracy, actually a lot of these governments, police, military, they're either complicit in or they turn a blind eye to some of this stuff that goes on. Not always, but there's a lot of it going on like that. And so actually, if I'm a family in one of these locations and my loved one gets taken, the last place I'm going to go is the authorities. Whereas, in the UK or in Europe and the US, we're spoiled. Our police get a bit of a bad rep at times, but they're good at this stuff.
Oh, they put it out of the bag when they have to. I've seen it. You know what I mean? So I know. I appreciate what's done.
But in some of these other countries, we weren't hampered by some legislation or policy or politics. We're a private company. We could go anywhere and do anything we wanted to do, as long as we didn't breach a load of laws that meant we could go to prison.
Technology helps nowadays. For instance, I sat in on a negotiation which was happening in Somalia, but the actual negotiation, the red room as you'd called it, was in Thailand. Do you know what I mean? So they had a live link between the two. So the whole thing was done miles and miles from each other.
And actually, there was a piracy case that was run from Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
A serviced office in Milton Keynes. So not as glamorous as the movies make out.
No.
Excuse me. And so anyway, there's lots of these cases, and the actual number of kidnaps a year is unknown, because if you think about it, these countries where it takes place, Latin America, Middle East, Africa,
anything South America, Latin America, is absolutely full of it, isn't it? Colombia, Venezuela, Mexico. It's an everyday thing there, isn't it?
It is. And it goes in waves, in fairness. But if you're the government there, you want tourism, you want business investment. You're not going to publicise the real figures.
Yeah.
So there could be anywhere between 30 and 40,000 kidnappings a year worldwide. And a lot of them are on local nationals. But where we would get involved, it could be with local nationals, but it'd be maybe when expats are taken, or you could be British, Australian, whatever, and you're on the way to the factory or the office in a country in West Africa because you're there for business development, or the Middle East, and you get taken, and then
it's usually the insurance companies will pay the tab on this as well, isn't it? So
a lot of it is linked to insurance. Like if the company, let's say it's an oil company or some kind of manufacturing company, they will probably take out some form of special risks insurance.
Because they will have a security representative who has a policy in place for this eventuality.
Yeah, and just like with your home insurance, if you want to make a claim, it comes through to the company that I work for. It would come through to me, again, at 3 a.m. on a Sunday or whatever, the most inconvenient time. And literally you'd then be on a plane to go out there to sit alongside the company or the family and negotiate the release and get the hostages back, debrief them, or you might do that remotely. But when you think about it, it's the most unregulated, ungoverned, dangerous trade or industry in the world. Yet it has a 93% chance of success through negotiation.
Wow.
93%. Not 100%. But I'll take those odds, thank you. 93%.
Yeah, that's better odds than some of the things I've done, I'm going to tell you.
And so what would scare me the most would be when somebody somewhere would start suggesting a hostage rescue.
Yeah.
And you'll know more than I will from your own experience of they are highly dangerous, fraught with massive risk.
Yeah.
Yes, if it's a last resort and you think the hostages are going to get killed, you need to kind of have that plan. But correct me if I'm wrong, it is highly, highly risky operation to do a rescue.
Yeah, of course. And the chances of everybody coming back that goes on that operation are quite slim, I'd suggest, as well.
Exactly. And depending where in the world and the level of training of the forces who were suggesting it would be a factor there. So we'd say to the client, which could be the family or the company, hey, listen, this negotiation stuff works regardless of the industry or sector or culture or type of people we're dealing with here. This works.
I mean, right now, this is quite topical, isn't it? Because as we speak in Israel, there is over 100 people who are now hostages. How is something like that going to pan out? How's that going to work? How do you see that working?
Well, yeah, I mean,
and I know Hamas. I've actually worked with Hamas. I've met Hamas face to face, so I know the sort of people you're dealing with. They are very extreme. They are very set in their ways. They are almost impossible to negotiate with.
Well, I mean, at the time of recording this, we're on the cusp, aren't we, of potentially 50 or so hostages that may be released in exchange for a ceasefire or truce. And I think it's important when we talk about negotiation in this particular context about separating it into two, because you've got the wider negotiation for the region. Yeah. What does it look like with Israel-Palestine moving forward? But what I'm interested in, although it's a key component of that, is negotiating for the safe and timely release of the hostages.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can kind of merge the two. And I think they need to, whilst they're connected, they need to be treated slightly separately. And when you think about it, even when there's just one hostage taken, it's a big challenge to get them back.
I mean, they had that Gilad, that guy, they had him for years, didn't they?
5
Do you know
years.
What I mean? Yeah, they had him for a long time, didn't they?
But the reason why that was successful was it took a while to open up communication channels, to build the trust.
Trust is a huge thing because there is no trust in that area of the world, is there? Do you know what I mean? They're just literally, it's not there on either side. Yeah, exactly.
And so, but trust is the number one success factor in kidnap for ransom cases working out or hostage negotiations. And I can't stress that enough. Without trust, it doesn't work. Because let's look at it now. You've got 200 plus hostages scattered across a war zone in one of the most highly volatile, sensitive regions in the world, with all these different players and different governments all wanting their own little bit of involvement.
Yeah.
The world's media looking at it, with two sides whose sole aim is the extermination of each other.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're negotiating with somebody who you want to kill.
Yeah.
And, you know, it doesn't get much more challenging than that.
No, it's a horrendous situation all round. No matter what way you view it from, it's horrendous. Isn't it?
And so, but thankfully, the third-party intermediaries, which we would see on a lot of cases, previous cases, where you get these people who weren't directly involved who would be the mediator. And in this particular case, it's Qatar and the Egyptians, where they have got the lines of communication and they've got the trust there for all sides where they can put a bit of pressure or sway.
Presumably, you've also got to find something that they both want as well. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Otherwise, you haven't got a negotiation at all, have you? And we have got something they both want. They want their prisoners back, and they want their hostages back, and they want safe passage for people to get out. And I would imagine there's also a prisoner exchange that they're after as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in a normal kidnapping, it's usually over money.
Yeah.
You let Phil go, and you're not going to get the money you want, and there's a reason why we don't pay what they initially demand. But you will get paid as long as you look after them. As long as you look after Phil and he comes back in one piece relatively quickly, you will get something out of this.
Yeah.
Whereas when you're looking at something like the Middle East, it's just a tinderbox of, challenge after challenge there.
Yeah. So can you name any of any of the cases that you've worked on as a civvy? Have any of them been press worthy? Have any of them been out that you can talk about?
There's been a few in the press, although we would sign a non-disclosure agreement on everyone.
I'm dropping you in it now.
Well, I mean, I can give, and in the book, what I did with the case studies is I would amalgamate some, so all based on true cases.
Yeah.
Went through about 5 levels of lawyers to make sure that people couldn't really identify themselves from it. Because again, it's not necessarily fair on the families unless they give their permission.
But also, there's a trust issue there as well, isn't there? In future cases, case history would suggest, oh, hang on a minute, it will all come out in the wash later, I'm not going to do this.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm respectful of that. But what I can kind of give general overviews of some of the cases where it would normally be in a number of different scenarios. You'd have a high net worth family.
Yeah.
Say it could be a shipping owner, Greek shipping owner or Singapore somewhere. And he would have some crew members taken off his ship by pirates. In the Gulf of Guinea, maybe. Yeah. And so we would have to then go to the shipping office or the family office and then set up that red center. And just like the Qataris are doing with Hamas and the Israelis, we'd have to open up those channels of communication, establish that trust, and then you imagine like a curve, like a reverse night tick, where they'd come in at their demand, we'd come an initial offer and then we'd meet somewhere.
Yeah. Try and get onto some level ground somewhere.
And the kidnappers, the pirates, they would use every threat and pressure tactic in the book. The most powerful one being silence.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, they'll do the mock executions. Yes, they'll do the threats. But the one that used to have the biggest impact, negative impact on the families, was silence. Not knowing when were they going to call next. And there's one case I was involved in. Again, it was the brother who... his elder brother being taken, and he thought, right, this is my moment to shine. And he wasn't able to control his emotions. And one day, he just lost it. He lost it with the kidnappers and threatened the kidnappers, which is not a wise move.
No.
And the kidnappers, very coolly and calmly, who were able to manage their emotions, went, right, we're going to kill him now, and hung up. We didn't hear anything for 6 months.
Oof.
Imagine the family dynamics.
Yeah,
there.
I mean, you must have thought they've done it.
But then they reach out 6 months later and went, right, you serious now? You ready to do this properly? And these were really professional, switched on kidnappers, but they weren't going to be messed around or spoken to like kids. They wanted to do a deal. And so when we allow emotions to get in the way, and this applies to our day-to-day lives, when we're emotional.
I was going to go there in a minute. I was going to say, right, what have you learned and where do you take it?
Come on to in a second then. But so let me just close this story out then, is that we had to then replace the brother with another family member, the cousin, who was far more level-headed around how to communicate under pressure, where there's lots of uncertainty, there's lots of conflict, and actually then, they've got the family member back in the end.
Mm. So, right, there's lots of gold in there, right? There's lots of gold in what you do and what you've done, and obviously a lot of the stuff that you've passed back to people who are still in the industry or people who are climbing the ladder now, invaluable to them. But you've looked at it at another perspective again, haven't you, and said, right, I can take that and I can give you that into your life. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, because over the years, like 300 odd cases, as well as all the military interrogation stuff and the agent running, all this is about a ringside seat into the human psychology. What makes us think, feel, and act the way we do, particularly in times of stress, overwhelm, challenge, conflict, crisis, but like the time we're living in now, you could argue. And there were certain themes and patterns that shone up, that shone out here. Doesn't matter where it was in the world, that the individuals and the teams that succeeded at the negotiations, they all shared the common tactics and a mindset towards them.
Yeah.
And conversely, the ones that struggled, they also demonstrated similar patterns and themes. And so I realized, you know what? This is so relevant. The crossover is so obvious between, just because I'm sitting down negotiating a kidnapping, the same emotions, the same mindset, the similar tactics apply that if I'm dealing with my teenage kids or sitting down wanting to close a really big business deal.
Yeah, I suppose if you're selling a car, for instance, the car is what is the hostage, and you're trying to negotiate a price with somebody and trying to get the best out of it.
All it is, I'm going to describe the opening line of the book is, life is a negotiation. Why? It's because we're seeking cooperation and collaboration and maybe a bit of influence all day long, every day.
And for something to work well, it's got to work well for both parties always, hasn't it? If there's nothing in it for somebody, they're going to walk, aren't they?
I might agree to a deal with you, Phil, but actually I'll walk away going, I've been had over here.
Yeah.
And you may have won that deal, but what you want is you want me to walk away going, it was an absolute joy working with Phil. Yeah. I want to come back and give him more of my business.
Yeah.
Or I want to continue our friendship or whatever it is. Yeah. So you want that long-term cooperation and collaboration. And
I mean, that's what businesses do, really, isn't it? They negotiate deals in such a way that everybody's so happy that they come back and negotiate another deal, and it gets bigger, and they tell other people that sort of stuff, don't they? So
they do, and the thing that gets in the way every time is our emotions. We're emotional creatures that think, not thinking creatures that feel. And so we're designed as a species to be driven by our emotions, and then we look to justify and rationalize things afterwards. And so if we can work out what someone else's emotions are, and we can identify them and almost label them and acknowledge them, it's the elephant in the room, then we can kind of allay any concerns or fears and balance their nervous system. And then we can bring about, objective, rational conversation about what really matters. But people will generally tend to rush to problem solve. They allow their egos to get in the way.
Ego's a massive thing, isn't it? Because if someone's got a massive ego, then it's like dealing with. It's just, how do I get around that? Do you have any methods to break down people's egos when negotiating?
Well, the first thing is to accept and acknowledge egos are always present, and egos are not necessarily bad.
Yeah,
it's what you do with your ego that counts. If I allow my ego to go, do you know what, Phil? I'm right, you're wrong. And I'm going to do everything I can now to prove that you're wrong and I'm right. That's the bad side of the ego kicking in.
Yeah.
But if I'm like, okay, my ego is telling me, Scott, this deal's important to you and you need to make sure you walk away with a good deal here. But actually, I can also empathize and understand that you need to be able to demonstrate a sense of success here, whatever. I need to find out what that means for you on the other side. And so through a series of questions, but other techniques, it could be something called emotional labeling, where we would preface something like, it looks like, it sounds like, or it feels like. It sounds like, Phil, that this deal is really important to you. And you go, yeah, it is. And I go, yeah, it sounds like you're really frustrated, though, that we're stuck on this particular aspect of the deal. And so I'm just trying to seek out and label where you're at, so that then generates a feeling in you of, hey, Scott gets me. He's making me understand.
So you're just breaking down barriers all the time by relating to...
Constantly. So imagine it's having a sensory acuity like a radar.
Your mind must be going a million miles an hour when you're talking to people, looking for all this stuff all the time.
To start off with, which is why I say to people, don't try and do all of it at once. Just do one technique, which I do go into detail in the book about how to do that. But now I've been doing it for so long, it's almost instinctive. And because I approach every negotiation, every communication, every deal with, I first need to understand where you're at.
Yeah.
What's this all about for you? Rather than going, right, Phil, this is what I want, but I need to seek out what you want first to then try and find a path through that so you walk away feeling that you've got what you needed, and likewise I have as well.
It's amazing stuff. Listen, I'm going to plug your book right now, so I'll plug it to that camera over there. Order Out of Chaos, and all the stuff we've talked about. Would you say, is it fair to say, is all in there? A tremendous read, and I genuinely believe that stuff like this does have an impact on your life if you can understand it, get through it, and sort of like live by it in a way.
Yep.
Thanks so much for coming in. I've really enjoyed the chat. Hopefully, you'll stay a friend of the show.
Absolutely.
And maybe as things develop elsewhere and we see some of this stuff going on, you can help us debrief it and understand it a little bit better.
Yeah, love to.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Phil.
All right, buddy. Nice
Cheers.
one.